So in this lecture, we're going to explore further some of the concepts that we talked about in the previous lecture, especially abstraction and analogy, and how they relate to common sense and knowledge. So Mitchell describes this project that's been going on for over 30 years, right, called Cyc. And it's kind of the love project of one particular computer scientist. And Mitchell calls it the most famous and longest lasting attempt to manually encode common sense knowledge. And this phrase common sense is used by the company itself and the developer, that this is sort of the special feature of this particular artificial intelligence system, that it is claimed that it actually has common sense, okay? It is a huge knowledge base that has been built by hand, that is programmed by humans. There's no machine learning at all. And it's combined with logical rules, so it's good old-fashioned AI. It's symbolic AI of the old kind. Well, and if you think this project was started 30 years ago, of course it's good old-fashioned AI. It's symbolic because they essentially didn't have neural networks 30 years ago, but it hasn't been changed to include them. It is still logical rules and a knowledge base. Now, they claim that new assertions can be inferred from existing assertions in the knowledge base, right? And, you know, they apparently have some clients. So why is Mitchell telling us about Cyc at all? Because it supposedly harnesses human common sense. Their website says this. Now, whatever kind of common sense Cyc might have, it was coded by humans in the form of statements and rules. Mitchell refers again to core knowledge, our intuitive knowledge of physics and biology and psychology, not in a school learning sense, but our learning, our knowledge that we intuit from being alive in the world. And Mitchell points out that much of this knowledge, this intuitive core knowledge, we don't even know that we know. There are things that we know, many things, that we just don't think about as knowledge, but we know them. So how could humans program those things into a computer system if we don't even know that we know, right? How could that ever become part of a system that was hand-coded? Now, as an example of how we might try to teach a computer to understand analogies, or program a computer, or have a computer, a machine learning system, learn how to deal with analogies, Mitchell gives us the example of what are called Bongard problems. And she points out that Bongard problems are actually what got her interested in computer science before she went to graduate school. Now, Bongard problems are visual puzzles, and they can be hard to solve even for humans, but they are really hard to solve, even impossible to solve for most AI systems. Like, it's very difficult to have a system learn how to solve these. And why is this? It's because in order to solve these problems, you got to use abstraction and analogy in your thinking. There's no other way to figure out the puzzle. That's what makes them especially hard for computers. And to solve them, you also have to generalize. You have to generalize from few examples. And as we've learned in the course, machine learning, artificial intelligence, neural networks require many examples in order to learn. So few examples, not really their thing. So here is one Bongard problem. you look at the 6 examples on the left side, and then you compare them to the 6 examples on the right side. You, the human, should be able to describe a rule that applies to all the examples on the left, but none of the examples on the right. That's a Bongard problem. Now, there are always these kinds of visuals, but the visuals can be quite different. There's always 6 on the left, 6 on the right. The solution for this one, give it a second. Can you see it? The solution for this one is that on the left, there's always one large and one small object. That's the rule for the things on the left. In this example, there's no shared rule for the objects on the right, just that they don't match the rule for the objects on the left. So in order to solve the problem, you have to determine which attributes in a set are relevant and which are irrelevant. So in this problem, both size and number of objects are relevant. One small and one large object appear in every example on the left side. That rule does not apply to any of the examples on the right side. In the right side examples, there are sometimes 2 large objects, there are sometimes 2 small objects, sometimes there are 3 objects in the image. So none of the ones on the right have one small and one large. Number is an abstract concept, as I mentioned in the previous lecture. So that's one of the things that makes Bongard problems so difficult for machine learning, for computers. Do you remember the Verge video from our lecture about machine vision? So an image recognition system's visual idea of a tricycle does not include 3 wheels. And this is an example of how the concept of number is very hard for machines, which is kind of ironic since everything in a computer is numbers, everything in software, everything in their programming, but the concept of number is just, computers don't get the concept. So the tricycle was identified in images by a weird shape, kind of triangular in the middle, and not by the fact that a tricycle always has 3 wheels. That's what a human would use to identify a tricycle, but the machine, no. So similarly, we've talked about how an image recognition system doesn't know that a dog has 4 legs and a tail. It just doesn't get those concepts from the images that it was trained on. So the idea of conceptual slippage, that is a concept that slips from one thing to another, is at the heart of analogy making, according to Mitchell. It's at the core, the center. So Douglas Hofstadter coined this term, conceptual slippage, in his famous book, Gödel, Escher, Bach. Mitchell illustrates conceptual slippage with this example using strings of letters, that is a sequence of letters. So the idea is that the initial string on the left side is, the alphabet in sequence, a part of the alphabet in correct sequence. And then the thing on the right side is that sequence slightly altered. And the analogy is, so if I give you a completely different sequence from the alphabet, can you apply what was in the first example and do that to the next example? So can you take the thing on the left and make it correct on the right-hand side? And the slippage part is in the 3rd line here. The slippage is that the first example changed one letter. And so then the second example, I should change one letter, only the last letter. But then if I give you a sequence like the 3rd line where every letter is doubled, Do you only change one letter? Or do you realize now the letters are doubled, so I change the double, not the single? So the idea of conceptual slippage illustrated here is that the concept of what you change slips a little bit when the original that you're given and asked to change, when the original is somewhat different, you can still use analogy to translate it into the result that's shown on the right side. We're not going to go any deeper into Mitchell's project with Copycat. It is explained in detail in the book. The Copycat project, though, is well known among AI researchers because among those who are interested in this problem of analogy, which is related to the desirable goal of being able to give a program one example instead of thousands, and then have the program be able to generalize to other situations. So that's the whole point of this thing with the strings of letters and the Copycat project, the idea that if the computer program can be taught or trained to generalize, that is, to use analogy the way that we humans would use it, then you wouldn't have to train a system on thousands and thousands of images, for example, or thousands of examples of text, right? You could give it one or few examples, and then it would be able to generalize from those. If you could get the program to successfully apply concepts in this little alphabet world that Mitchell describes in Copycat, then maybe those algorithms that you develop could be used in other environments with more practical application. Then Mitchell discusses a visual example that's similar to some other examples we've seen in the course when we talk about computers not understanding things that just come naturally to humans, like the context within an image. So in this 2012 photo, President Obama is playing a prank on a member of his staff. And we can easily see that everybody in the picture, everybody in this photo is in on the joke. They all are laughing, they're smiling, and that's how we know they're in on it. They see what the president is doing. Look at his foot. Look what he's doing on the scale. So the only one who's not in on the joke is the staff member who is so seriously weighing himself on this stand-up scale. So, as Mitchell points out, we can also figure out from the context, from what we see in this image, we can figure out that they're in a locker room, probably in a school. We don't know why, unless we read the caption, but we are familiar with this environment. So we recognize the room, we recognize the scale, we recognize that the president is with his Secret Service men and members of his staff. All these visual clues are obvious to us because of our experience in the world and the fact that we know what a scale looks like. And we know when people are laughing in a photo, and we know what a joke is. So the senior director of AI at Tesla expressed the opinion that embodiment might be required before computers can understand a scene like that photo that we just looked at, where President Obama is putting his foot on the scale. So this idea of computers would have to be embodied. We mentioned this before in the class, right? Not every AI researcher or computer scientist believes that this is necessary, but more than a few put out this hypothesis saying, until computers are embodied, they will not be able to understand what humans understand. With a body comes experience and the ability to interact with the world. once again, we're talking about whether general AI, general artificial intelligence, will ever be possible without embodiment of some kind. So this idea of embodiment is a bit beyond anything that anyone is really attempting right now. This idea that the computer system, the artificial intelligence software, would have to reside within some sort of physical framework or structure that was able to sense the world in 3 dimensions the way that we do.